every single vote counts.
The loudest person is usually the least informed.
Nobody's an asshole for not supporting them.
As someone who is politically illiterate,
I think it's a little embarrassing being drama queens and throwing a fit.
Legislation is collaboration.
It's already illegal because they're not voting.
They're dead wrong.
Not just throw your hands up and wait until they vote you some power. Welcome back to Strangers Talking Politics. I'm Alli.
I'm Bethany.
And I'm Jesse.
We have a wonderful guest today. Her name is Nancy. Thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. I'm Nancy. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm originally from North Carolina, born and raised there, and I moved to Atlanta about 2.5 years ago. And my content on TikTok, you can find me at NCBlueDot, NCBLUDOT. And I talk about deconstruction from evangelical Christianity and how socially Christian nationalism has infiltrated the Republican Party and what that means for policy, what that means for culture, what that means for society as a whole. So that's kind of what I am passionate about. And what I talk about is coming out of the church, deconstructing, and what that means politically too. So thanks for having me.
Damn. Okay. Not small topics. Definitely go check that out if you are interested in any religious deconstruction. Our first topic is going to be a local topic to us here in Montana, and it is Republicans being expelled from the party.
All right, so the Montana GOP sent a letter out last week that, here, let me pull it up. The Executive Committee of the Montana Republican Party has censured the 9 Montana senators as Republicans following their repeated alignment with Senate Democrats during the 69th legislative session, which, I mean, that's silly. They haven't done that except on a few key votes. It goes on to say, well, it names the 9. Ellsworth is one of them, and we spoke about him during our last episode. All right, here we go. The Montana GOP Executive Committee has determined that these senators no longer represent the values or interests of Montana Republicans. As a result, the GOP will no longer support or fund their campaigns. The party is also urging the media and the public to refrain from referring to these senators as Republicans. The Montana GOP is committed to ensuring that its elected officials uphold the trust of their constituents and the party's principles, and will continue to advocate for a united Republican voice in Montana. Since then, one of the Republican senators has gone on to say they're in Helena to represent their constituents, not to work for the party bosses, which is absolutely a fair retort. And the reality of the situation is Montana doesn't have official party registration. Anybody can say they are a Republican or say they are a Democrat. Anybody can run as a Republican or a Democrat. They don't have to have a party's approval to do so. And so it was a big virtue signal by the Republican Party to slap the wrist of a handful of Republicans who voted to expand healthcare in Montana and who weren't willing to come down on Ellsworth.
I have a question about this. So I have a quote from an article that says 44 out of 50 senators support a motion that removes Ellsworth from all his committee assignments and bans him from the Senate floor for life, though he will still be able to vote remotely. So I guess my question, as someone who is politically illiterate, what is the point of removing him, from banning him from the floor, from removing him from his assignment committees, if he essentially still has all of the same power that he did before?
Yeah, if he can still vote, like, what's the difference?
He loses his committee assignments, and that is a big deal because those committees are what are the groups that decide what bills end up being voted on. But it's essentially the same thing they did to Zoe Zephyr during the last session but they did it to her because she proclaimed that some of her colleagues had blood on their hands. Oddly enough, Rieger, however you pronounce his name, was the head of the House, and he's the one who initiated the censure on Zoe Zephyr. Now he's in the Senate, and he's doing the same thing to Ellsworth.
Yeah, he seems to be pretty crazy with the expelling people in Montana politics. He seems to really like that. I just call him Rieger. I don't know, whatever. But I think it's really interesting is that I wonder how much of this, we had touched, I believe in our second episode, we had touched on how even sometimes sometimes in some of our more rural counties, you have Republican or Democrats that will run as Republicans because it's the only way they can get elected. And so I wonder how much of this is, the Republican Party not only trying to signal that we need to have, stricter rules around party affiliation declaration, but then also trying to root out some of those potential, quote unquote Democrats, or if it's just a knee jerk, childish reaction of, well, you didn't vote how Republicans said you should, so you're going to get your hand slapped now.
Here's a question from an outsider. Like, how connected is the Montana GOP with the Trump administration?
They're supportive of the Trump administration, but there's not a direct connection. All of these senators that were censured by the party, a good portion of them were endorsed by Governor Greg Gianforte, who is very well connected to the Trump administration. I think this is sort of an issue of the Republican Party organization and a couple of currently powerful Republican senators being upset that other senators aren't doing what they're told. And so they're throwing a little bit of a fit and trying to slap these people's wrists. And I think it's a little embarrassing because it doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, it's for show, it seems like. Asserting power for the sake of doing it, I guess.
And can I ask, what was the reasoning for this? I know that we touched a little bit on him last episode with abuse and a lot of that, but what was the actual reason that he was removed? I have a quote from Senator Forrest Maidenville. I'm so sorry. Yes, it says, "We're going all the way back looking at a pattern of abuse that needs to be addressed by the Senate body in regards to ethical violations or obligations, it seems like." But was it like, what was the reason for this, I guess is my question, for people who may not know.
The supposed reason for the censure of Ellsworth specifically was the attempt by him, or alleged attempt, to secretly funnel state funds to a buddy of his. A no-bid contract for somewhere around $150,000 that didn't go through the proper protocols and wouldn't have been available to the public to see, or for other organizations to bid on the work. That was brought to light, we believe, by Regier. How do you pronounce that, Alli?
I just say Rager, or like Rager.
Yeah, that was brought to light, we think, by him when he leaked it to the press, and a story came out about it, and the Republicans, the larger party, were already upset with him because he was part of this quote-unquote nasty nine that they're calling the 9 senators who have voted with Democrats on, I think, 4 bills where the rest of the Republicans thought they had unity.
Aren't they likening it to a coup? Like, they're basically saying that the Republicans in the Senate are basically saying that these 9 senators that are voting with Democrats have effectively staged a coup over the Republican Party in the Senate because now they don't have their supermajority and the Freedom Caucus can't run roughshod. That's the gist that I'm getting from what I've read on it.
Yeah, they're being drama queens and throwing a fit because they didn't get what they wanted.
It seems very performative. This is the time that we live in, right? Because now we're looking at, isn't the Republican Party on every level seeking to do this? They are seeking to punish people that do not run lockstep with them on every issue. And that's not traditionally how our democracy works, right? Like, you get them together for some things. There are some things that, you're not going to be able to pull your majorities for. But now if you, stand in any kind of opposition on any step for any reason, you're going to be punished for it. It's weird that we have this environment of you have to pledge fealty to your party instead of perform what is best for your constituents and what your constituents want you to do.
Legislation is collaboration. I mean, to have good legislation that's not teetering on one side or the other, I mean, policy's supposed to have both sides' opinion. And, if you both leave with 75% of what you wanted, I consider that a win, when you can come up with legislation together, but now it's total fealty to the party. But I don't know how many pieces of legislation y'all said that they voted with the Democrats, but I mean, just 9 going over to vote with the Democrats a handful of times is considered a coup. It's so dramatic.
It is very dramatic. And, Alli, you were calling it performative. And I guess maybe we shouldn't say only the Republicans do performative politics, because we live in an era where it's quite clear that that's what most of it is about, is performing for the cameras in order to get reelected. But this session has been especially theatrical.
Yeah, it really has. And I think the last session, was theatrical as well. I remember there were, well, of course, with, like Zoe Zephyr and how they treated her, there just seems to be a lot more melodrama going on now than there is. No, that's not true. There's a lot of great policy that's going on, but it does seem like the melodrama is ramping up, I guess, is how I want to represent my thoughts on that. And I think, to some degree, I liken it to like small town stuff. Like that's just what small towns do, because there's not a lot else to do. But I think there could be big implications down the road. And if we're getting to a place where your fealty is to your party and you don't know who to vote for unless it has a specific label on it, instead of understanding what's happening in your state or in your country or in your county on whatever level, and trying to make the best decisions at those levels for the people, then we've lost the plot. We have a big problem, right? And I think that getting away from that is really important.
I find it kind of interesting. It seems like, obviously, because it was approved, but it seems like there's a lot of people who are, I believe, many of us believe that this motion is appropriate for unethical failure to disclose a conflict of interest, which we believe is what is at issue, Flower said. Somebody else stated penalties in the motion are strict, in my opinion, but I also think they're fair. And then you have a few some of them it's a little too much. What is the quote that the judges say? Promising young man is kind of the gist I'm getting from one of these. The quote is from someone named Boldman. Sorry, Boldman. I don't know this man. I think certainly I would have been interested in a compromise, but the good senator from Ravalli County has kids. He has a new grandchild. I'm sure he'd like to, as a former president of this body, be able to come here and, whether he has to vote or not, take photos and still be a part of this institution until the day he dies. And I think it's just too close to expulsion for my liking. It seems like a lot of the people who are, quote unquote, against him being censured and being removed from the committees don't really have a reason other than, like, are they afraid that it's going to happen to them?
I think it's important to make a distinction here, right? So the first distinction is that when we're talking about Ellsworth, there's a lot of just cause for what's going on with him, as we discussed in the last episode. Like, this guy's got a long history. When it comes to the other 8 Republicans who have voted apart from their party, that's a very different story. And so while collectively, yes, they have been censured, and while, yes, these things are going on with Ellsworth, we're talking about Ellsworth, I think that's really important to specify that what's happening to him is long overdue. It should have happened a long time ago. What's happening to these other Republicans maybe is all just performative to begin with.
Thank you so much for listening. We wanted to give a shout out to MCAT for letting us use their studio space and equipment. If you're enjoying the show so far and would like to be a part of the conversation, visit us at stppod.com. That's stppod.com. To hear more from our strangers, you can find them at their socials linked below in the description. Okay, enough of that. Back to the yapping you came for. We are going to go into an Am I the Asshole? Am I the asshole for telling my brother that since he didn't vote, he doesn't get to complain? This is 62 days old. I live in California, so there really was no point in voting since it'll always go blue. My brother voted for everything except president because he thought Kamala was bad. Now he's complaining about Elon and then defunding the VA and other things. I told him that he fell for the propaganda and should learn from it, and don't complain to me when I was telling you that Trump was going to do something like this. There is an edit. This person did say, I voted for Kamala. California swings so far blue that any individual vote would never have been the deciding factor. I didn't say I didn't vote for Kamala.
Yeah, I see the point. I get that in a state like that. Well, no, I'm just going to default to what I said last episode. The fact of the matter is very simple. Voting is the very barest of minimum participation a person can have in their freedom. Yes, I understand that it's gonna, your one vote is not gonna sway the whole of California's umpteen million people. Okay, I get that. But I still, maybe it's altruistic of me or not, I don't know, but I still feel like you should have voted and you should have weighed the options and participated. Just my thought on it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like voting, it's a constitutional right. It's been embedded and amended. We couldn't vote until the early 1900s.
19th Amendment became law in 1920, allowing white women to vote. Native men and women were not considered citizens until 1924 to as late as 1928. Other women of color and black women were not given full voting rights until 1965 when the Voting Rights Act is passed, outlawing discriminatory practices and providing federal oversight to ensure fair elections. However, it wasn't until 1975 the Voting Rights Act is extended to include language minority protections, ensuring that voting materials are available in languages other than English.
So it's like, it's not just one vote, it's the action of it. And like collectively as a society, us going to a place to choose our representatives is like really powerful and is the cornerstone of America, I think, of like why we're so different. But I can't get on board this whole protest vote thing, especially now where we are. That's just how I feel about it.
I agree. Let's read a couple of comments. Someone said, not the asshole. Close to 30% of eligible voters don't vote. If you don't participate in your right to vote, I have no sympathy for you when now your rights are in jeopardy. Everyone is getting screwed other than super rich white men, regardless of their party, because of the current administration and the Project 2025 policies. Someone else said, I think it's weird that in a country built on the pride of its independence, so many people choose to give up their right to choose. And this one got me. So they said, you're the asshole and also you're not the asshole. So they said, you're the asshole specifically because you said, quote, no point since it'll go blue, unquote. Just this alone is enough to call you an asshole. You always, always should exercise your vote, regardless of the inevitable outcome, and then in parentheses, or what you deem it to be. They said every single vote counts. Not the asshole for setting your brother straight on the fact that he should vote or that you don't want to hear about it. And someone said, yep, I'm in New Jersey and the margin between blue and red gets closer every 4 years. New Jersey is historically blue, but all it takes is some apathy to change that.
It is apathy, and it's gotten worse, and I think that people that are so loud on both sides of the aisle, right? But like the loudest, like we say here in the South, a hurt dog will holler, right? The loudest person is usually the least informed and has just gotten into the political process within the last, since Trump came on board, and they know they're trade experts all of a sudden, they know how policy and government run. They don't, and so it's like just the act of voting and understanding the impact of your vote at the local level. There's so much that you can do in your community. Like that's the beauty of it, is federal stuff affects us, but not like school boards and commissioner races and townships and all that. I mean, that they take the money that's appropriated to them and decide where it's spent, like if a park's going to get built or not, that affects your direct community. So I've always been a strong advocate of voting regardless of where you live. I grew up in North Carolina at the time the Democrats were in power in the 90s, but they were conservative Democrats. And so there was no progress, but they were investing in things like education, but social issues they didn't touch. It was like, so, but I lived in a red county. And so like my vote really didn't do much, but it was, my mom always taught me, this is really an important thing to do as an American,
Yeah, indeed. I happen to agree. There is so much that gets done locally. And I think part of the apathy to participation in voting is on our education system, right? I don't feel like we have explained or really educated people appropriately on what our rights are, why it's important that we vote, showing that local elections are just as important, if not even more so important than other elections and so forth. And so it's important for us to exercise our right to the freedom that we enjoy, especially on a local level. And like you said, Nancy, just to follow up with that, here in Missoula, we're going to have an election in May, and that's where the school board levies are going to be on the ballot. Are we going to be able to improve education for our children? How many people in our county are going to show up for that versus how many could? And margin of error is much, much lower when you're talking about local races, local and state races. What do you think, Jesse?
We have to highlight the difference between apathy and being disillusioned with the system as it stands, because There are a lot of people out there who are not refusing to vote because they're apathetic. They're not voting because they don't believe their vote matters. And there is some degree of truth to that when you talk about the value of a vote compared to what's being done by even lobbyists in the state legislature. We've, through Citizens United and through our current media culture, have put such a large emphasis on spending money to persuade politicians to do certain things that an individual person's vote does matter less and less. And I think that might be a tough thing to say, but it's the reality of the situation right now.
You're saying that our votes are basically being watered down by the cash that's flowing through Washington, right?
Yeah.
But then doesn't that make it all the more important that the more of us vote? Like, doesn't that mean that we have to concentrate our votes even more?
I do think more of us should vote. And I've voted in every election since I turned 18. But refusing to vote is an action just as much as voting is. Not participating in the system is a statement of protest, and it does have value.
I do tend to agree. So I didn't start voting. I am 32 years old, and I didn't start voting until I moved to Montana 8 years ago. So I've only voted in 2 elections. Because I voted for Joe Biden, and then I voted for Kamala. I think it was 2. But I definitely was I grew up in Connecticut, and I very much was under the impression of like, well, my vote doesn't really matter. Well, my parents don't vote. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Who cares? It's all rigged anyway. Whoever's going to win is going to win. Like, that was always my understanding. However, I will preface that with, I was also severely uneducated in the way that politics works. I had a lot going on, so I didn't pay attention a lot in school until we moved here and Nick started explaining it to me. Like, I didn't know that there were local elections that you could vote for your judges and your Senate and your school districts and your levies. Like, I didn't know that was things that people voted on. I legitimately thought that it was just the president who made all of those decisions. And I was like, what do they care about my stupid vote? They're going to put whoever they want in charge, and they're going to do whatever. And unfortunately, I think there are still a lot of people who probably think that, and not for nothing, but I kind of think it's by design, because if people are uneducated on how much voting, regardless of voting for the president, I still, I know I'm going to get a lot of shit for this. I tend to agree that I don't think one vote really matters as far as like in the presidency. Maybe with this specific election, maybe it would have, but I think overall, probably not. But I think in local elections, I think it makes a huge difference whether or not you vote.
It absolutely does. But when we put the value if we say an individual is an asshole for not voting, first, I think the assumption is by the person making that judgment that they were going to vote along with them. But the real issue is that the parties, the candidates, those that are running for office need to make a compelling argument that they are worth voting for. And if they're not, nobody's an asshole for not supporting them.
I just think in the culture of the climate that we're in, that's the way campaigns should run, but it's not how most people get elected. Most people get elected by gerrymandered districts and culture war personalities. That's kind of where we are in the American electorate, and it's changed from when I was working in campaigns and stuff. I remember Howard Dean and that scream he had in 2004 or something, and he lost his lead because America thought he was too emotional to run for president. And now, you know what I mean? Like, it's just different now. People vote for, it's just with social media and the way the media machine is, it's like we are living in a reality show. People aren't making decisions and voting based on fact or actual policy recommendations. Politicians aren't compelling the electorate to vote for them because of these 3-step plans. It's like, I don't want trans people to be visible in society. Hey, yeah, I'll vote for you. It's different now, I feel.
I think we all had some great points. Our final topic is going to be discussing the SAVE Act. It seems a little bit of a doozy. There's a lot of things that could be affected by this. Does anyone want to give a very brief synopsis of, if this is passed, what that means for people trying to vote?
Yeah, I can. It's House Resolution 8281. It's called the SAVE Act, and it requires individuals to provide document proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. And it does 8 things, and I kind of have made notes about this. And do you want me to go through just off the top what they overview of that?
That would be wonderful.
The bill was first introduced last year as Republicans focused on non-citizen voting. So they want proof of citizenship when you register to vote. And it's going to require you to provide documentation of your citizenship, so a passport or a birth certificate. And for married women who've changed their names, that can be very problematic because our birth certificate isn't necessarily what our current name is, so we need additional documentation for that. And one thing that I read when I read through this bill, a real ID, a driver's license, it's not enough now. With this act, you'd have to show your citizenship. They're also upending the way that people register to vote. So a lot of states do like online registration, or you can register at the DMV. The details of like how that's going to be carved out in that bill is still up in the air, but there's just a lot of different ways that it can really provide additional barriers for people. There's also criminal penalties. So there's a lot of like additional laws that states can implement on like criminally how to charge someone that isn't a citizen, but also the election officials. Like if they verify a birth certificate and it's forged or it's not correct, they could face criminal penalty for that. States would get more access to federal immigration data. So like your Secretary of State in the state gets more federal data through this act. And then also some states are considering their own proof of citizenship law. So a lot of times when the federal government implements any sort of vote or voting legislation, states go a step further and say yes and this, and it just depends on the state. But that's kind of an overview. From the top, it's really providing citizenship documents to register to vote is my understanding of what it is when I read through it.
Wow, what a catastrophic bill, right? I think they're saying it's to address fraudulent immigration votes. Immigrants who are undocumented or not citizens or not eligible to vote, according to the Republicans, are voting in these massive numbers, which is just patently false, right? We found that this kind of voter fraud is just virtually non-existent. And so the back end, unfortunately, that's how they're selling it, right? But the back end of this is, who are we going to affect here? We're affecting the 19th Amendment women who, had to fight for our right to vote. We are affecting people who have been adopted. We are affecting trans people. We are affecting anyone who has had to change their name or just wanted to change their name for whatever, druther. And it harkens back to me, like I hear an echo in my head every time I hear this stuff of, having to show your papers in Germany in the 30s. I am against the idea that you have to prove your citizenship through X, Y, and Z. I think that streamlining documents so that everybody has the same scrutiny right across the board for the documentation to vote, I think that's fair. I don't have a problem with that, but I don't think that it should cost anything to the people. Anything extra individually, I think, that would be a public service that we should provide. And I think that you shouldn't be excluded if your, name is not the same, or, I don't think that there's really a need to be addressing this non-existent problem of immigrants, voting in mass.
Yeah, I'm reading over some articles, and there's a couple of them. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a couple of paragraphs, but basically the gist is it's already illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. We already have safeguards. You have to swear under the penalty of perjuries that you are a United citizen. You have to provide your driver's license number or state ID number or your social security number to be able to vote. And there is a thing in here. So research finds it's rare for non-citizens to vote. For example, an audit in Georgia found that just 20 of the 8.2 million people registered to vote in the state are not actually United States citizens. So that is 0.0004%. It does not seem like a good enough reason to do all of this. I agree that I know that Jesse had talked last episode a little bit about I think it was digital IDs or online IDs, which I don't necessarily think is a bad idea. It seems having an extra form of identification that you need that costs money in order for you to do something that is your right as an American citizen seems pointed. It seems purposeful because let's be so fucking for real. Who is this going to affect? That like there is a group of people that this is going to affect, and there's a reason that they're going after those people.
And it's not immigrants.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's not immigrants, and it's not people who are here illegally. It's not people who don't have the right to vote because they're not voting.
The sales pitch is, we're going to stop these terrible undocumented workers from illegally voting in mass, when it's just not happening. And over and over and over again, the story, as is in Georgia, echoes across the country. It's just such a minute problem, and that's just the device that they're using to deny other marginalized people, bigger groups of people that vote Democratic in much larger numbers, their vote.
Well, and I want to push back just slightly on that, because I think the group that this is really going to affect more than any other are lower income rural living people. And for the most part, when you look at people who vote democratically, a lot of them do have the resources to make sure they are correctly registered to vote, to pull out that information, to prove that they have had their name changed. It's largely going to be fundamentalist religious minorities. The Amish and Mennonite populations are going to have some major issues, and people that live a long way from their courthouse.
That's such a good point. I didn't even think about fundamentalist religions that don't really participate a whole lot, save for voting. That's such a great point.
Can I insert some stats here? 21.3 million people of American citizens don't have access to proof of citizenship documents readily available. So either they don't know where their birth certificate is or they don't have one. I've met voters that they're older citizens and they just don't have a birth certificate. There's no documentation of where they were born. There's 147 million Americans that do not have a passport. And those are the two documents that they're one of the two that they require. So I think that's a great point, Jesse. I didn't even think about that. But like, there's a lot of people that in rural America that don't have passports. They've never traveled anywhere internationally. And a lot of times those documents are lost or they don't have access to them.
It's a bad bill. It should not be passed. But if the Republicans are pushing this because they think it's going to help the Republican Party, they're dead wrong. The people who are typically voting with Democrats nowadays very often do have the resources, the education, and the ability to go through these steps to prove that they can vote and to make sure that they do vote. It's going to be the most motivated voters who are still going out and doing this. In the last few elections, the groups of people that have really swung to the right are the ones that do not have those same resources and do not have that same access.
And not for nothing, we also live in a day and age where we have social media. And you even saw with the ICE raids, there were a lot of people online educating people on your rights. And if this is something that is passed, like you said, I think that it's going to hurt the Republican Party more because I think that people that are not Republican, I'm not going to say specifically Democrats because I know that there's a lot more people involved in that. So people that are not Republicans, I think also have a higher likelihood of researching what documents are needed, where to go. They're also more willing to help out their fellow neighbor and maybe help out their elderly neighbor who, wants to vote not for Donald Trump and help them go and get the information they need or do something that's online. I think that there are a lot of people who I want to segregate MAGA from Republican. I say that a lot, but I do truly believe that they are two separate parties. I think they lean the same in a lot of things, but I think they are different. But I think specifically where MAGA is concerned, they don't really want to help out their fellow person, whereas people who are against the SAVE Act would be more willing to help people out who maybe can't. They're more willing to carpool. And if you live in a rural community, maybe, take 3 cars and a bunch of you go all at once to do this thing. So I think that the people who are against it, like Jesse said, would probably be the least affected by it, maybe. But then you also have to take into consideration the people who are poor, who just don't have the money to go and get a passport, or there are people who are working 2 or 3 jobs who they can't go to banking hours to get a passport. Like there's a lot of things that are going to go into it. And then you have, people who are transgender who, there's already instances of people trying to not put their they're putting their dead name on passports, and then that becomes another thing. If you are a transgender person, do you have to put your dead name on your passport to be able to legally vote? Like, that's just another way to, that it's another fuck you to transgender people or people who are adopted. There's so many things that could be an issue with it, but I don't think it's going to affect the people they think it will.
And to the point of ensuring that only U.S. citizens are voting, like, let's say it is a bigger issue than it really is. The state of Montana, I think it was 3 cycles ago, up in Malta, they had 2 immigrants illegally vote in the election. It was caught after the fact, and it was prosecuted. It was 2 votes, not enough to sway any election that was on that ballot, but it can happen. That can be considered a legitimate concern. So let's say that it is. We don't need to be putting all of the workload on the voters to prove this case. The reason we have government, the reason we have these services is so we can exercise our rights, and we need to rethink the way of ensuring people have these IDs. If we want to make sure everyone is a legitimate voter, sure, let's have that ID, and let's make sure that we have systems in place that make it affordable, if not free, and accessible. And employees who work for the state or the county who are able to walk people through this process and help them get it done, as opposed to making our most vulnerable do all of that work.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty valid point, right? Is that there are ways to streamline this and actually make it less burdensome for the voters in general. But I also want to point out that all the votes that these guys are going to shed with this act, right? The poor vote, the rural vote, these kinds of things, those are opportunities. Every time the Republicans shoot themselves in the foot, that's an opportunity for other parties to do the legwork, to do the footwork that Bethany was just talking about, to educate, to go meet the people. And that's part of the problem that we're seeing with the Democratic Party right now, is that they have not figured out that in a time where you don't have necessarily a lot of power per se, then your job is to go out and be with the people and to stand with the people and to educate the people and to support the people, not just throw your hands up and wait until they vote you some power. And I think that the Democrats have not figured that out yet. Well, not all of them. There are some of them who have figured that out right away. We're looking at Bernie Sanders as a great example. He and AOC are on tour right now, out among the people, talking to the people, rallying and supporting the people. Jasmine Crockett,
I mean,
I think, is a
AOC
great
and
example.
Sanders are going to be in Missoula, Montana next week.
I cannot wait.
And
Are y'all going?
Bernie's not even technically a Democrat, and AOC is, I would say, she's not accepted by the mainstream wing of the party. They're the ones going out and doing this work. It's not the Democrats that are running the party, reaching out to red or rural parts of this country.
Absolutely not. And you're 100% right that is one of the things that does give me hope in this time, right? Because this is a tremendous opportunity for progressive people to really step up to bat and meet the need of the people. And the more that we as progressives, I consider myself a progressive, the more that we go where the people are and we meet them where they're at and we talk to them about their issues and we actually have those handshake conversations, the one-on-ones, the in-person convos, the better we're going to do. A, because it honors our democracy. That's what our democracy is about. B, because we're creating a bond. We're letting these people know that we care and that we actually do have their best interest at heart. And 3, because billionaires don't have to do that. They can just phone it in all day long with a couple of bucks. Just, Venmo them some change and make a phone call, assistant person, and that's it. But they never have to have that face-to-face with anybody. And there's a lot of power in that interaction. And that is the power that matters, is that interaction with the people.
We call it dirt road progressives down here in the South, is rural Democrats. But now our generation, I'm a progressive as well. I feel like the Democratic Party has attached themselves to corporatism and the corporate arm of the Democratic Party. And anybody running as a Democrat in rural America needs to distance themselves from the National Party as far as they can, because they have lost the trust of the working class American. And the Republican Party took advantage of that. I mean, and they see the inauthenticity of saying, we care about your wages, we care about union membership, but they're donating and receiving corporate money. It's not a good look, and you're not being honest with the voter about what your suggestions are. And people see that and they vote accordingly. So I love that, Allison, because it is true that coming up in the midterms, there's a huge opportunity for rural dirt road progressives to get in their community and start talking about the impact that they're experiencing now and over the last couple of years, and run your campaign that way. That's just as a policy strategy, or a campaign strategy.
I saw a really telling photo from Representative Boldman, as she's a Missoula representative, from April 5th. And to me, it said a lot. I'm not coming down on her. I don't know her very well. The photo was of her standing up high inside the Capitol, taking a photo outside the Capitol of all the protesters, right, in Helena. And in that moment, what I saw was exactly the problem. You, as a Democratic representative, as someone who is vehemently opposed to the Trump policy, as someone who is representing people who are out there, why are you not out there in the crowd with them? Why are you standing above them, excited about how many people showed up? Well, that's great, but why aren't you in the crowd? Why aren't you out there doing the work? When we ask you as constituents to stand up for your people, we're more asking you to stand up with us than we are for us, although for us is part of the job. And so when I see images like that, I'm certain that she did not mean for that to be the case, but that is exactly the message that came across in that picture, is that she's too good to go stand with her people. She would rather stand inside above them and say, yay, people showed up.
I think if you're going to run for a seat, get with your constituents and go to rallies with them, be in front of the people of your district and have real conversations. I mean, that's what public service is. That's what running for election is supposed to be, is you're a representative of that district. And sometimes the needs of your district don't align with your party all the time. It doesn't align with legislation that you see, but your priority should be the district and your constituent. And it's symbolism, right? Like, you see a photo like that and you're like, well, she had the opportunity to get in there and participate.
I think maybe that's also kind of part of the point of this a little bit is I've been sitting here listening to you guys make some really good points, and there's a part of me that is like, well, yeah, this would affect people who are more rural. This would affect a lot of Republicans, and would that not be kind of the point? Because a lot of those people who voted for Trump or who voted Republican are coming out now and they're saying they regret their vote and they don't support that party anymore because they're focused on trans rights or their tariffs this and whatever. And so it's like, is that kind of the point? Are they hoping that Democrats will do what they've always done, which is stand above the protests? They're not really talking to the people. They're not hitting on, talking about Gaza and Palestine, and they're not talking about the topics that people want them to talk about. And so they're hoping that, well, maybe we'll get to this point where more people will exercise their quote unquote protest right by not voting, and all of the Republicans who wouldn't have voted for us, who would now vote Democrat, well, they're in rural areas or they're working class, so they can't get these new IDs, so they won't be able to vote. And now it'll just be left for the people that we want to vote for us, and it'll be close enough that, if we gotta fudge something here or there, like, and I know that this is thinking that there was a good quote from the last episode that Jesse said, and I don't remember it, but it's 4D chess, but that it's, I don't necessarily know if that's really what they're thinking, but it kind of might play out like that. I don't know. That's just kind of where my brain goes, but my brain goes.
Yeah, and we shouldn't say that the Republican Party is hoping the Democrats will fumble it. I think they have a pretty good case to say that the Democrats will fumble it. It's something that we seem to be exceptionally good at doing.
That's where my hope comes in, right? Because yes, we know the Democrats are going to fumble it. They always do. That's the track record. But the progressives do not fumble in this area. And so I guess, I don't know if it's misplaced hope or not. I don't think it is. I think that the people are now mobilizing. I think we saw that with how much the people mobilized around Madam Vice President Harris. I think we're seeing that with people mobilizing on April 5th, even though our leaders weren't out there with us. A lot of them weren't there. I think people are just now starting to, feel the wind in the sail of motivation here. And this is a golden opportunity because this country is ripe for big change. We need it. We've wanted it forever. And this is our chance to really step up and create a stronghold for change for the people instead of change for the billionaires.
Not to take away any hope, but my only issue with that is there's so much work that has to go into it. And there's a lot of work that would need to be done to change the circumstances that we're in right now. And I try to hold on to the hope that things can get better and things will change for the good. But it's also just who we have in office, and kind of historically, it is just very gloomy.
If you want to see your country change, you can't just vote anymore. You have to do more. You have to be one of the people that is going out on these dirt roads, that is going out into the communities that you live in and having the in-person conversations, the hard ones, and finding humanity and common ground. It's hard to do. Not everybody can. The important part is that you find the part of the movement that fits your best skills and you get busy, because it's all hands on deck, period.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize where your gifts are and what you're good at and what your role is in the progression of where we want America to be. Like, what's next for America, And I think stepping up and getting involved, voting, like you said, Allison, is the bare minimum. Getting involved in your local party and seeing how you can serve on committees that really make big decisions for your community. I mean, it's just little things. If you have kids, getting involved in PTAs and being a change agent in your community and having conversation with people that may vote differently from you, but you both share that shared commitment to exercising your vote and your participation in democracy.
There are very few individuals who are going to be able to go out there and completely swing the vote one way or the other. But what everybody can do is, like you said, go to a school board meeting. You can volunteer at your senior center and you can talk to 2 or 3 people and be compassionate and work within your community to bring a couple of people over to make a little bit of a change. And if enough people do that, we will see the culture move.
Absolutely. This is not an overnight thing. You're not going to go out and have one conversation and expect people to, Eureka, I have changed my mind. That's not going to happen. But when you build relationship and you build community with these people, you start to understand they have needs, and their needs are very similar to yours 9 times out of 10. And those are things that you can coalesce around and things that you guys can act together on, even if you don't agree on every single thing. But you have to get involved, and you have to meet your neighbors, and you have to talk to people and see them as human beings.
I think this is a beautiful way to end our show. I want to say thank you to everybody. I think this was a very deep and insightful conversation. I think we went over a lot of different things. And Nancy, thank you so much for coming on and ending on this note of getting in your community, meeting your neighbors, and fighting for what you want. I think is a beautiful, beautiful way to end this.
The library will be closing in 15 minutes. Please make your final selections and take them to the checkout area. Please return all laptops at this time. Those using meeting rooms, please end your meeting, clean up, and vacate the room. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for listening to our episode this week. It was wonderful. Thank you again, Nancy. All of her information will be linked in the description below. We will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.